This is update for October 2, 2023, day 586 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for October 1. I'm going to start with the strategic updates and then I'm going to switch to the situation on the battlefield as always. I have to start today with the political drama that's happening in the US just because it's directly affecting Ukraine and its ability to defend itself. For obvious reasons, Ukraine is extremely dependent on the US, both financially and military-wise in terms of equipment. Because Europe, while it can provide some financial resources, it does not have enough equipment because it's basically degraded its military-industrial complex, and generally, essentially, it was disarmed all these years. So it's simply impossible for Europe to immediately start to be able to replace the US. But going back to the US, there was a lot of discussion about this temporary sort of budget just for 45 days. It doesn't include help for Ukraine. There is help for sort of, I don't want to say whatever, it's probably, let's say, next 45 days or next 60 days for Ukraine. There's leftover funds and so on. There's emergency funds that can be used. So it's not going to be affect Ukraine immediate in major way. So there was this it's called stopgap legislation passed to fund U.S. government for 45 days, next 45 days till I think November 15 or 16, to give time to actually pass legislation to pass basically budget for each sort of silo, right? So basically the budget is going to be collection of single purpose legislation, which is actually makes sense, and that's actually a proper way of doing things as opposed to passing everything together, because then there is no really accountability for anything. As part of that, so there's during this 45 days there was a plan that there will be legislation passed to fund Ukraine for the next fiscal year in the US, and the number is probably kind of staggering for the US. It's 100 billion US dollars. It's not small number, and given the whole situation, financial and fiscal, as I discussed in the previous video, it's creating a lot of resentment among some politicians. So the plan is to pass this bill next 45 days. And however, I mentioned before, there is 117 Republicans who are against voting for this legislation to continue supporting Ukraine. And that's actually majority of the Republican representation in the lower chamber of the U.S. Parliament, and lower chamber of U.S. Parliament is in charge of the spending and basically making spending decisions, because the upper chamber essentially just approves or slightly modifies, but doesn't have really initiative. So all initiative is coming from the lower chamber, and if I'm correct, plus minus a couple people, Republicans have very tiny majority. It's 218 parliamentarians, and Democrats have couple, I don't know, 3 or 4 less, something along those lines. The whole point is 117 is majority of 218. So majority of Republicans don't want to fund Ukraine anymore at all. There is another rule in the US Parliament that the speaker, who is Republican, cannot use democratic minority to help to pass the laws in U.S. Parliament. So basically, if you don't have, Republican majority, or essentially all Republicans, you cannot pass bill to support Ukraine, to support funding of Ukraine. So this is kind of like a difficult situation in the U.S. Parliament. That was, so there was an attempt to do a compromise where some of these Republicans out of this 117, they really wanted to increase funding for the U.S. southern border. And Democrats were opposing it, but so basically it was concession. Okay, let's just lump together these two things: Ukraine funding and funding for this the southern border, and sort of essentially reach a compromise, because that was important point for this for the Republican Party to basically strengthen U.S. southern border, and what they try to say, close it, but that's not really how you close it. But I'm not going to discuss whether it's actually effective use of funds or just check mark, mechanistic check mark. But so what happened is one of the out of this 117, one of those Republican, let's say, representatives, I think that's what they called. He was completely sort of dissatisfied with this, with the Speaker of the lower chamber, who is also Republican, and he basically put forward like voting that to fire him. So and that's really just, I don't think the name of the person who put this sort of vote, his name is Matt Gaetz, he's from Florida, but it's sort of, in some ways, is not even important, the name of the person, because he effectively, what he wants is to they obviously fire the head of the Republican majority, who is sort of willing to compromise and want to put together both Ukrainian funding and funding for the southern border in the U.S. And pass that as one piece. And effectively, what this Republican from Florida is doing is, and I don't think he really realizes, is what kind of like chain reaction he ignited. He may actually, in some way, may initiate breakup of the Republican Party, because what's going to happen is you have 110 or 111 Republicans who want to pass the funding of Ukraine, and the only way for them to pass it is to work together with Democrats, and that can actually by itself break up Republican Party. And I don't think he realized that he's starting this sort of motion. He saw that he's just simply gonna block all of the Republicans to vote for Ukrainian funding in this way, but it actually made tremendously backfire and actually blow up the Republican Party from within. So in some ways, it's like to compare what this person did, or could potentially, the outcome could potentially be, is similar to how World War I started, right? Where there was Serbian Gavrilo Princip, who killed some Austro-Hungarian royalty in Serbia, in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, and that really started. That was sort of nobody was sort of expected that murder will start World War I, right? So in some ways, this is very similar, very explosive situation. And so going back to all of this, so technically there are votes for Ukrainian funding, because you have Democratic Party and then 110 or 111 of Republicans to support that. So you have majority. The problem is if the portion of the Republican Party is going to vote with the Democrats, that will break Republican Party. And not to mention about this what's the name, motion that he put forward to fire a Republican speaker, which is by itself can create sort of political drama, political crisis. Because if I remember correctly, when this person was the speaker was elected, I think it was like in January or December. It took literally a month or so, and like tremendous number of votes before he passed. So so this time, that's like 45 days that is needed actually to pass single purpose legislation for each sort of spending silo. They will be sort of spent on sort of re-electing new Republican speaker, and this is or instead of doing the sort of productive work. So this whole situation, it can be extremely explosive. So what I'm trying to say is the problem is not so much in in funding for Ukraine. That the problem is actually even bigger and more sort of deeper. That there could be literally a political crisis in the U.S. That makes nothing possible in the U.S. Parliament. So for that reason, that's really the big problem. And I don't think this representative from Florida really realized that he may have started really big political crisis. So we'll find out how things gonna play out over next weeks. But that's really where the problem is. So in other words, there is enough support between Republicans and Democrats. So basically, this so-called bipartisan support for Ukraine to continue help Ukraine. And there's definitely support in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate. So there's not going to be a problem there. So it's only sort of isolated to the lower chamber. And again, it's majority of the Republicans, 117, who are opposing and against it. So we'll find out, but the situation can get. I'm not saying it's high probability, but it's not sort of also negligible in terms of situation getting into really difficult for Ukraine, just because there's going to be political crisis in the U.S., which is, as you can imagine, situation there is very explosive politically, especially because the elections in 2024. So there's a lot of how to say parallel things happening that can turn into sort of perfect storm for the U.S. and then it's obviously going to affect Ukraine. And as I said, Europe simply cannot pick it up just because it's just the production of military production is just simply not there. And then, obviously, as I said many times before, was extremely critical of Ukrainian political military leadership is incapable, inept, unprofessional in terms of not creating opportunities for Ukraine to be self-sufficient, or at least partially sufficient in major types of military equipment, armaments, and so on. So they basically go around and beg instead of actually being productive and creating capabilities inside of the country, which country has Ukraine has a lot of sort of military leftover of military industrial complex. There are skilled engineers, so it's all possible. It's just a question of political will in Ukraine, which is it's just not there. So it might be also perfect storm for Ukraine because it decided to rely on the U.S. And then Europe, and U.S. might go into its own political crisis. Europe cannot do it, and then internal capabilities are also not there because they were suppressed intentionally by Ukrainian political leadership. So this could be a perfect storm for Ukraine from that perspective. I'm not saying this is high probability, but it's not small either. So let's just switch now a little bit to Russia. So situation there is continuing to deteriorate fiscally, financially, and so on. So Russian ruble dropped to 100 per $1. So for those who follow, if you remember, it already was actually over 100. Then there was basically threatening by central bank and so on, and it just bought some time. But things are returning pretty quickly, much quicker than actually I expected, back to the pre sort of intervention levels, and the situation continues to deteriorate basically financially in Russia. This coupled with the deterioration in terms of supply of diesel fuel and gasoline can lead to some difficult situation. It's not going to be critical for Russia. It's not going to take it out or stop the war machine by any means. It's just going to be much more difficult, much harder, much worse for Russia, but the whole war machine will continue working as it does for now. Now let's switch to the actually walk through the front line. First, and I'm going to do it in a clockwise fashion as I always do. So first, situation along the state border remains more or less stable, the same, nothing of importance there. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are also frozen. This is the most so-called frozen section of the front line, and the reason for that is that neither side has enough resources to conduct any operations here. So basically everything is tied up either in Zaporizhya or close to Bakhmut or in front of Donetsk, and that's pretty much it. The rest is just it's being held just to keep the line there. Now let's look actually at North Donbass front section of the front line. The northern actually part also is frozen for the same reason, not enough resources by both sides. And actually I want to clarify, so from Ukrainian perspective, not enough means not enough equipment, not enough shells to continue active operations on other section of the front line. From Russian perspective, it's more question of not enough people, and not enough people on the Russian side is not because Russia cannot do mobilization, but it's being pushed off as much as possible by Russian political leadership. So in a way, Russian political leadership is trying to kind of create, isolate or insulate Russian society from the war. In some way, it's like sort of like a traditional imperial war where the metropolis doesn't get affected and it's just far away. It's just relatively small percentage of population participate in it, and the society doesn't truly feel it. And that's just in this way, this looks very much like imperial war, and from a Russian perspective, and it's very sort of fitting because in many ways, Russian president is in favor of Russian empire, not the Soviet Union. I discussed this several times before. It was a long time ago, but he is, let's say, believer in Russian empire, not the Soviet Union. So in Russia, there are two sort of opposing schools or opposing forces that are fighting all the time. Is One is Soviet Union, then other one is Russian Empire, and the difference is that Russian Empire is based on capitalism, the Soviet Union based on communism, socialism, whatever you call it, collectivism. That's probably the best description for it. And in the Russian Empire, the way it's, the capitalism is in a way perverted, and I would say it's more closer to the fascism. The way I would say it's not perfect, but it's not sort of traditional, free market capitalism. It's more fascist type of capitalism. Now let's move to the southern sector of the North Donbass front line. There is ongoing fight going on around Klishchiivka and Andriivka and this whole sector, where Russian troops are trying to counterattack and recapture lost ground. That's just the essence of what it is. It's purely tactical. It's nothing major. It's not any counteroffensive or anything. Just purely tactical fights. And Ukrainian forces, I would say, regroup and try to basically dampen this hit, and then probably will resume at their attempts to squeeze Russian troops, continue squeeze of Russian troops in this area. So it's basically like push and pull kind of situation. And this moment, this is in this sort of part of the of this dance, Russian side is sort of on attack, and then it's going to be a Ukrainian turn after that, after Russian forces exhaust themselves. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here are sort of traditional. Russian attacks north of Avdiivka, as you can see here, and then also Marinka, but it's all again tactical, with any sort of perspectives for any real gains or anything from the on the Russian side. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. So as you can see, there's a lot of activity by the Russian side, where they are aggressively trying to recapture lost ground. It doesn't look at this point as sort of any major counteroffensive, but the fact that it's all coordinated in terms of time and in geography, it's sort of, I'd say, makes it sort of noteworthy, and there is a potential that this is maybe beginning of larger, attack, where it's not just purely tactical. At the same time, as I said before, Russian army equally is not capable of doing any true offensives, but they just may apply large forces tactically to squeeze Ukrainian forces out. It's unclear at this point, but because it's essentially just like a first day, we'll see if this means anything more than just this local counterattacks. But there's a chance that Russian command decided that they sort of want to do this counter squeeze, because I don't want to even call it counter offensive or anything. It's just counter squeeze on their side. So as things develop, I'll provide updates. Ukrainian forces were essentially on defensive here. Last section of the front line is along Dnipro River. Things here are all quiet. Russian, let's say, forces are on alert. They believe that Ukrainian forces may do sort of large landing in, like, basically establish more bridgeheads and try to really decisively break out from those bridgeheads. But this is sort of normal alertness of the Russian side, because obviously they understand that this is high probability, high risk for them. Doesn't seem that this is sort of happening or coming soon. But again, if things change, I will provide update. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time.